Hello and welcome to the channel. As you can see, I'm feeling very Christmassy today, and what could be more Christmassy than going up to the biggest name in YouTube philosophy and having a bit of a pop at him. I assume YouTube works kind of like a prison, where you just find the biggest guy you can and sort of slap him in the face, and that earns you everybody's respect. But seriously, I wanted to focus on his one particular video, Abortion and Ben Shapiro, because it represents a paper by Thomson called In Defense of Abortion, that I really like. I taught it at uni to first years for years. I feel like it's a really accessible paper, a really good way of getting people into philosophy. Like the trolley problem video I did before, it has a really engaging thought experiment that always gets people interested. Philosophy Tube's video that I'll be discussing has over 1 million views now, which I don't really know how to calculate this, but might well be over the amount of people that have actually read the original paper. So his ideas and his interpretation of the paper might be more widespread in the paper. And I think that's a real shame because I think he does a bad job representing it. So here I kind of want to set the record straight. I want to tell you what the paper really does say and how and why Philosophy Tube misrepresents it. It's kind of sad to see this happen to philosophy. Like, the paper is decades old, but the argument it makes is much more coherent and a better argument than Philosophy Tube presents years later. So it's a question of why philosophy has degraded like this. And I recognize he's trying to make it accessible for people, but he also needs to include good argumentation, or there's absolutely no point in doing it, right? Like, the argumentation is what needs to be made accessible for it to work. Otherwise, he's making nonsense more accessible, and nobody wants that. I really feel like in a 38-minute long video, he could have covered the entire paper in full depth. The paper's only about 20 pages long, I think, so he could have easily covered everything. He doesn't. He takes shortcuts and then overreaches his conclusion because he doesn't really want to represent the paper. He wants you to agree with him. A couple of things I want to make clear before I start. First of all, I am not arguing against abortion in this, okay? Like, my own views on abortion, completely irrelevant. I imagine I line up pretty closely with what Philosophy Tube believes about abortion. Certainly I'm closer to him than I am Ben Shapiro. It's just that he makes certain claims badly, and even if I agree with the conclusion he wants to get to, I believe in good argumentation, so I want to show you where he goes wrong, right? The other thing is that I want to include a content warning for abortion, obviously, and also rape, which does come up. None of this is going to be graphic, it's just the words will come up quite frequently, so if you're upset by that kind of thing, you might not want to watch. And finally, for anyone that's thinking of arguing on Philosophy Tube's behalf, I want to make the point that he agrees with what I'm saying he's doing in his own video. At 15:33, he says, maybe you think I stacked the deck. Yeah, I did, but at least I admit it. Okay, so we know he is stacking the deck, and he agrees that he's stacking the deck. I'm just going to show you how he does it and why that means his conclusion isn't properly supported in the video. First, the good parts of this video. Philosophy Tube is obviously arguing against Ben Shapiro and obviously disagrees with him pretty extremely about a lot of things, I'm sure, but he does a really good job representing him. When he introduces him, he doesn't do it with ad hominems, he's quite fair about it. And when he does his impression of him, it's clearly like a sort of nuanced satire where he really understands the subject. It's not an over-the-top parody where he makes him seem ridiculous or anything like that. You really get the impression Philosophy Tube gets Ben Shapiro and what his appeal is, even if he doesn't like him. And that's really important whenever you're trying to take down somebody. It prevents straw manning, to see them as they really are instead of some sort of ludicrous over-the-top parody of themselves. So full marks for that. He takes on his opponent on level ground, which is really good. The rest of this video then is going to be about the argumentation, which unfortunately is not so good. So obviously you can go and watch the video yourself if you like. I recommend it maybe if you want to understand this video. I'll try and make this video comprehensible if you haven't watched his video, Abortion and Ben Shapiro. I don't think he does a particularly good job recapping what the paper's about. I'll recap the necessary elements here, but I won't be giving a full recap of the paper either, since I'm only attacking the parts he talks about. But the video is, frankly, like a lot of his videos, a lot of style over substance, a lot of flash and dramatic images and statements that are designed to non-rationally persuade you to agree with what he's saying. Even if he's not making a proper rational argument, you might leave the video thinking you agree with him, but if pushed, you might not be able to explain why. That's the flash, that's the style over substance, so I'm going to break that down for you here. The part of the paper I will recap is the primary example, the violinist example, they call it. It's a thought experiment like the trolley problem we discussed previously on this channel, and it is supposed to be an analogy for abortion. So essentially in the analogy, so imagine you're in a situation, you wake up one day and you've been kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. They have performed some sort of weird operation on you, and now you are like hooked up to this famous, successful violinist. And the society tells you that you need to remain hooked up to this person for a period of time, let's say 9 months, that it's an analogy for pregnancy, right? The question concerns how permissible or moral it would be for you to just unhook yourself completely so the violinist dies because he needs you for support. You have a rare blood type and you're the only person in the world that can fix this violinist, right? Under those circumstances, is it permissible to unhook yourself and walk away? The intuition is supposed to be that most people think it would be okay to unhook yourself, walk away, and let the violinist die. The analogy is then supposed to be that in a case of abortion, it is permissible for you to have the abortion and remove the baby being analogous to the violinist. In Philosophy Tube video, he acts this out where his parody of Ben Shapiro is put in this situation. It all gets rather confusing. I'll refer to that character in Philosophy Tube's video as Ben Shapiro to make things simpler. By the way, I do get the feeling these kind of things are made deliberately confusing, so it's hard to criticize Philosophy Tube, but I'll do my best. Philosophy Tube in the video uses the analogy that Thomson has in the paper to show that Ben Shapiro is in contradiction with himself, right? Since he assumes Ben Shapiro would be okay with unhooking yourself from the violinist on the grounds that, he's a libertarian type and he wants personal freedoms to be primary, so he should be free to remove himself from the violinist. And he thinks that that means he should be okay with abortion because it should be a woman's right to extract herself from that situation if she chooses to, no matter what the harm might be to the unborn baby. The relevant thing about the scenario is that Thomson uses a violinist because she's accepting the premise that an unborn child is just a person. So what she's trying to show is even if you treat an unborn child as a person, abortion can still be okay. Because in this kind of situation, it would be okay to extract yourself from the violinist and let them die of their kidney ailment or whatever. So even if you treat the baby as a person, abortion would be okay, right? That's the point we're trying to get to. At 4 minutes 52, we start to see some of the problems with the framing come in. Philosophy Tube describes Ben as pro-state forced pregnancy, which sounds really scary and horrible, right? Like state forced pregnancy doesn't sound like anything anyone would want, especially if you're not a libertarian or a liberal type who believes in personal rights and freedoms. The problem is that almost everyone would be pro-state forced pregnancy in some circumstances. Thomson certainly is. As we see later, she doesn't think that abortion is always permissible or should always be allowed. And if it's not allowed, that means it's state-enforced pregnancy. I don't know Philosophy Tube's own views on this subject, but I'm not sure he would be comfortable with a woman who is, days away from birth, walking into an abortion clinic and getting an abortion because she just decided she doesn't want the baby, thanks. She wants to go on a skiing holiday next week and she needs to have the abortion now so she can go. So it seems like most people could be described as pro-state forced pregnancy in some situations. So that's the problem with the framing there. He makes Ben look a lot scarier than maybe he should. If you're interested in watching his video, it's from 8:34 that Philosophy Tube decides he'd rather have done drama at university instead of philosophy, so he opens up his dressing up box and invents this crazy scenario which he plays out for us. The main problem with the analogy as he presents it, for me at least, is that he doesn't mention that the Society of Music Lovers kidnapping you, or Ben Shapiro in the video, he doesn't mention that that's an analogy for rape in Thomson's case, right? It is forced upon you. Now, Thomson doesn't think that's a very important factor in the argument. I think it's probably more important than she lets on, but she does at least recognize that people might think that the rape is the important aspect there. So she provides a bunch of other arguments to cover all her bases. Philosophy Tube doesn't. He never even mentions that the kidnapping is analogous for rape. And you think, well, you're acting this scene out. The scene would look very different if the Ben Shapiro character at the start voluntarily agreed to get attached to the violinist. And then a few months later decided, even though they knew what the situation was going to entail, a few months later he just decided, actually, no, I'd rather unplug myself, walk away, let the violinist die, right? Your emotional intuition is going to be very different in those two cases. So it seems like something Philosophy Tube really, really should have addressed. The paper is so clear on this point that I can only assume Philosophy Tube knew it, because he does philosophy. I think he was doing a master's at some point. He may have gone even further. He knows what he's talking about, so he had to deliberately leave that out to make his argument more convincing to you, even though it's actually logically a less convincing argument because Thomson's paper does a lot more work, like a lot more. Phil Tube's video ends at about 34 minutes. Ben Shapiro is forced to admit he was wrong, but it isn't clear what he was wrong about. The implication seems to be that he was wrong about abortion. Again, this is incredibly simplistic. He's been painted as Ben Shapiro, anti-abortion, then he admits he's wrong, so pro-abortion people must be right, right? Well, that's not how Thomson frames it. She's much more nuanced. Her conclusion is much more restricted than this. And again, Philosophy Tube never comes out and says, I've proven all abortion is okay, or that's what Thomson proved, but that's the implication that he's trying to get you to through his over-dramatized, emotionalized reenactment. We aren't left clear in the end whether Ben Shapiro is wrong about all abortion all the time, or whether he's just wrong about abortion in the case of rape, because that's the only analogy that Philosophy Tube has provided us with. It isn't clear what Philosophy Tube has proven at all. If it is just about abortion in the case of rape, that's obviously an important topic, but it is only a fraction of all abortions. So how much work has this video really done? Thomson, in her, again, fairly short paper, includes at least 6 other thought experiments, try and cover all her bases about abortion in cases of voluntarily having sex, about cases where the mother's life is in danger, right? The argument is to try and prove, in as many cases as she can, that abortion is morally permissible. And even then, she doesn't agree that all abortion is morally permissible. So Philosophy Tube seems to be doing less work, but claiming a greater victory, right? His conclusion is more far-reaching than Thomson's, even though he's done less work to get there. To quote Thomson exactly from page 65, she writes, "My arguments will be found unsatisfactory by many of those who want to regard abortion as morally permissible. My account does not give a general yes or general no. In other cases, resort to abortion is positively indecent, and indecent in a doctor to perform it." I've cut out some of the connecting sentences there, but you get the gist. So Philosophy Tube deliberately and drastically misrepresents what Thomson said, which is a disservice to a pretty good philosopher. The long-lost son of David Brent doesn't really offer a conclusion at the end of his video. It isn't clear what his stance is. It's just clear that he disagrees with Ben about some aspect of abortion. It isn't really clear what they disagree on, where they agree, which would be useful, right? I mean, that's the whole point of an argument. You're supposed to reach consensus with people so that you all agree on something. And I do have to insist that this kind of thing must be deliberate. He's at master level philosophy. He writes papers. He knows you need to include a conclusion, as I'm going to do in this video. By the way, I also include page references in my videos, so that if you have access to the paper, you can go and check what I'm saying, right? He doesn't do that on purpose, so that you can never check what it is he's saying. Point being, he knows you need to include a conclusion to wrap up what you're saying and make your points clear. He doesn't want his points to be clear. He wants them to be broad and slightly confusing, so that you sort of think, well, yeah, I seem to agree with what you're saying there, but it's never clear what it is he's saying. So I'll provide a conclusion to my own video by quoting Philosophy Tube himself. He says this about Ben Shapiro, and I think in doing so, he kind of gives his own game away. Philosophy Tube says, about 2154, "Imagine a chain, and each link in the chain is like a different position somebody could hold. What Ben Shapiro does is he moves you on to the next link, even though the arguments don't work." This kind of thing is so brazen that it might be deliberate, because that is, of course, exactly what Philosophy Tube is doing in his video about Ben Shapiro. He's taken one very specific analogy for a very specific case and broadened it out somehow to all abortion without telling you how he's done it. It's like a magic trick. Thomson worked really hard to avoid doing that kind of thing in her paper by covering all her bases, and he just ignores it. As Philosophy Tube says about Ben Shapiro at 2833, "You wouldn't pass Philosophy 101 with that." No, you wouldn't, Ollie. No, you wouldn't. Again, cannot stress enough, I'm not saying Philosophy Tube is wrong in his views about abortion. I probably agree with him most of the time about abortion, but his arguments for getting there are very, very bad, and he's done a massive disservice to a really good paper. This kind of thing doesn't help the abortion debate, because it leaves so many gaps in the argument that people like Ben Shapiro will always be able to come back and, win, because it's quite easy to win against a flawed, weak opponent. And Philosophy Tube has presented a flawed, weak argument. If he put the time in, like Thomson did, and created a strong argument, the video wouldn't have to be longer or more boring. It should be more successful because it's a better argument. So the whole thing was just kind of sloppy, is my conclusion. He sloppily and deliberately misrepresented a paper to try and persuade people that abortion is in all cases morally permissible, which he hasn't argued for yet. That's the video for today. I will be uploading throughout the rest of the month. I'm going to do some videos maybe on university lifestyles and possibly Brexit, I think, if that takes my fancy at the time. Please do leave a like if you liked the video, comment if you've got anything to say, if you want to get a discussion started in the chat, and subscribe so that you get notifications whenever I bring out a new video. I'm also on Twitter now under the name Dr. Tom Pepper. You can see me there. I'll be posting my videos there and occasionally yelling at the Welsh government, so that's tons of fun. Until then, have a good one, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.